A sun-drenched park, a child's laughter, then a scream that rips through the tranquility. Witness a mother, Clara, brutally assaulted. Her precious daughter torn away by a powerful, abusive ex-husband. Despair, helplessness. But from a nearby bench, millionaire single dad Ethan Thorne sees not just a tragedy, but an injustice he cannot ignore. This isn't just a story of fleeting sympathy. It's the gripping account of how one man orchestrates an audacious plan, even buying the abuser's own house, to reclaim a stolen child and restore a shattered life, igniting a fierce battle for justice and forging an unexpected, life-altering love. Prepare to be moved as their extraordinary journey begins now. The late afternoon sun, a molten gold, stretched long, dancing shadows across Willow Creek Park. Children's laughter, bright and unrestrained, wove through the gentle sigh of autumn leaves. Ethan Thorne, a man whose quiet intensity often belied the vastness of his success, sat on a weathered bench near the playground. He sipped his cooling coffee, his gaze fixed on his 7-year-old son, Leo, who, with boundless energy, was hurting a bright red soccer ball across the sprawling green. Just as Ethan glanced down at his phone, a sound, sharp and desperate, sliced through the park's serene symphony. "No! Please don't take her!" A woman's voice, raw with anguish. Ethan's head snapped up. Not 50 feet away, near the park's ornate stone fountain, a disheveled woman with tear-streaked cheeks was being brutally dragged to the ground by a man in an impeccably tailored dark suit. Clutched in the man's other arm like a rag doll was a little girl, no older than 5, her small face contorted in terror, tiny arms reaching back for her mother. "Stop it! You can't do this!" the woman sobbed, scrabbling to regain her footing. The man, with a chilling indifference, shoved her back down. Onlookers watched, a tableau of frozen curiosity, but no one moved. Ethan was on his feet in an instant. "Hey!" he called out, his voice a low growl as he strode towards them. "That's enough!" The man in the suit whirled, fury flashing in his cold eyes. "Stay out of this. It's a family matter." Ethan's hand went to his pocket, retrieving his phone. "Looks like assault to me. Should I call the police?" The man hesitated, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. He hissed something venomous at the woman before storming off, the little girl's cries of, "Mommy, Mommy!" trailing behind him, each one a tiny dagger to Ethan's heart. Ethan knelt beside the woman, who was trembling violently on the grass. "Are you okay?" She looked at him, her eyes wide pools of panic and despair. "They took her," she whispered, the words barely audible. "They took my daughter." Gently, Ethan helped her to her feet. "Come on, let's get you checked out." At the hospital, after the angry bruises blooming on her wrists were tended to, and the tremors of adrenaline had begun to subside, she sat beside him in the stark quiet of the waiting room. Her name, she murmured, was Clara. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," she said, her voice a ghost of its former self. "You don't have to apologize," Ethan replied, his tone firm yet kind. "That man, Marcus, he was hurting you, and your daughter." She nodded slowly, then, as if a dam had finally burst, her voice broke. "He's my ex-husband, Marcus Vance, a city councilman, powerful, influential." The story tumbled out, a torrent of pain and injustice. "After the divorce, he used everything, money, power, connections, to paint me as unstable. He had a fake psychiatric evaluation filed against me. I was forced into a facility for 6 weeks. By the time I got out, custody, it was gone." Ethan stared, stunned. "That's criminal. He made it look clean, legal. I don't even have visitation rights. He claimed I'm a danger to Lily. But I'm not." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm her mother. She needs me." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I believe you." Clara looked at him, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You don't even know me." "I know what it feels like to fight for your kid," Ethan said softly. "Leo's mother. She died in an accident. The courts didn't think a single dad, a businessman, could handle it. I had to prove myself. Every single step." Clara's face softened, a fragile understanding dawning. "So, you do understand." "More than you think," Ethan replied. They sat in a charged silence for a moment before he added, his voice resolute, "Let me help you." Clara looked up, startled. "Why would you do that?" "Because no one else is," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. "And because no child should be ripped away from someone who truly loves them." Clara wiped her eyes, a new hesitant hope kindling within her. "I just want to see her again. Hold her. Tell her I didn't leave her." Ethan nodded. "We'll make sure she knows." And in that sterile hospital corridor, something profound shifted. Not just sympathy, but the nascent stirrings of justice, of healing, of a connection neither of them could have anticipated when they'd woken that morning. Under the dim evening light filtering through the guest house window, Clara sat curled on the edge of the plush sofa, clutching a warm mug of tea Ethan had prepared. She'd barely spoken since they arrived, her arm still bearing the faint phantom ache from the afternoon's assault. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, observing her silently before stepping in with gentle purpose. "You're safe here," he said quietly, setting a soft blanket beside her. "My son, Leo, is asleep in the main house. No one knows you're here." Clara gave a faint nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered after a long pause. "You didn't even know me." "You didn't need to be known," Ethan replied, his tone a comforting blend of firmness and kindness. "You needed help." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the wind's soft caress against the ancient oaks outside. Later that night, as the gentle rain began to patter against the roof, Clara finally began to speak, her voice low but steady. "It started when I got pregnant," she said, her gaze distant. "Marcus was different then, charming, powerful. I thought I was safe." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He didn't want a daughter, wanted a son. Said girls were a liability. When Lily was born, he barely held her." Ethan listened, his expression unreadable, a storm gathering behind his eyes. "He started isolating me," Clara continued. "Told friends I was unstable. Stopped me from working. Then the pushing began. Then the bruises. When I tried to leave, he said no judge would believe me. And he was right." She reached into her worn bag and pulled out a creased photograph of a toddler girl with enormous, soulful brown eyes. "Lily's all I had, and he took her. Said I was insane." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "How did he convince the court?" "He faked it," she said, her voice laced with a chilling certainty. "Paid off a doctor. They diagnosed me with a delusional disorder. One hearing, 20 minutes, and she was gone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Do you know the doctor's name?" "Dr. Alistair Finch," she said, the name sharp with painful memory. "He worked with Marcus on some kind of health board project years ago." Ethan made a mental note. The next morning, while Clara rested, shielded from the world in the quiet sanctuary of his guest house, Ethan made a few discreet calls. As a venture capitalist and a single father who had navigated his own legal labyrinth, his network spanned both financial and legal circles. Within hours, he had confirmation. Dr. Alistair Finch had indeed served on the board of a hospital expansion project, a project significantly funded by Marcus Vance's campaign donations. More than that, there had been whispers, unsubstantiated, informal, of professional misconduct. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, a plan beginning to form. That afternoon, he returned to the guest house, a slim file in hand. Clara sat on the porch, the weak sunlight catching the auburn glints in her hair. "I think you were right," he said, offering her the folder. "This is just the beginning, but it's something." She opened it, and her eyes widened. "That's him," she murmured, pointing to a photograph. "Dr. Finch," Ethan confirmed, then directed her attention to a section highlighted in stark red. These were payments made by a shell company tied to Marcus's old real estate firm. One went to Finch the week before your hearing. Clara's hands began to shake. Ethan looked at her, his voice low and steady. "He bought your diagnosis, Clara, and I am going to help you prove it." She stared at him, tears welling, not of sadness this time, but of the profound shock of someone, at long last, truly believing her. "You really mean that?" she whispered. "I do," Ethan said simply. "And I won't stop until we get your daughter back." Ethan Thorne had never navigated the murky waters of family court before, but he knew the stench of corruption when he encountered it. After securing the damning evidence of Dr. Finch's connection to Marcus Vance, he wasted no time. He hired a legal team renowned for dismantling an opponent's dirty legal maneuvers, headed by a composed, razor-sharp woman named Vivian Holloway. He laid out the case for them in crisp, matter-of-fact sentences, the fury simmering beneath his calm exterior carefully veiled. "This isn't just about a custody battle," he told them. "It's about a woman stripped of her rights and a child kept from her mother through lies and power." Vivian Holloway raised an eyebrow, her gaze piercing. "If half of what you're saying is true, Mr. Thorne, we're going to expose a very ugly mess." "That's the plan," Ethan said, his voice devoid of inflection. Within days, the legal team began their meticulous excavation of court records. What they unearthed was more insidious than anyone had anticipated. The lawyer originally assigned to Clara's defense had inexplicably withdrawn right before the custody hearing, replaced by a young, inexperienced associate who, records showed, had only passed the bar 3 months prior. His defense was perfunctory, almost as if designed to fail. The transcripts revealed that Clara's desperate objections during the hearing were dismissed without due consideration. The judge, an old acquaintance of Marcus Vance from law school, had rubber-stamped the psychiatric report without requesting so much as a second opinion. "It was never a fair fight," Vivian concluded grimly. "She was never meant to win." When Clara heard the findings, she sat in stunned silence, her hand clasped over her mouth. "All this time," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Maybe I'd acted too emotional. But it was all set up." Ethan sat beside her, his hand gently covering hers on the table. "You didn't lose your daughter because you failed, Clara. You lost her because they cheated. And now we fight back." The legal team also began reaching out to former staff members of Marcus Vance's household. Most refused to speak, cowed by Vance's influence. But after a week of persistent, careful digging, Ethan's team found one name that stood out: Sophia Ramirez, a former live-in housekeeper who had left just a few months before the custody hearing. She agreed to meet on one stringent condition. "I want protection," she told Vivian over a secure line. "He has friends in high places. I have 2 boys. I won't put them at risk." "Done," Vivian assured her. "We'll file a confidentiality clause. You'll testify remotely, and your identity will be sealed." At the clandestine meeting, Sophia's voice trembled, but her memories were starkly clear. "He hit her," Sophia said, her eyes downcast. "More than once. I saw him push her down the stairs, then told the staff she was clumsy. She cried every night. He threatened her, said she'd never see her baby again." Clara's hands clenched, her knuckles white. "Thank you for speaking," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means." Sophia's voice softened. "I remember you reading to your baby every morning. I remember the love. That's what stayed with me." The testimony was recorded, encrypted, and submitted as part of the appeal package Vivian's team filed, alongside financial documents, court transcripts, and the damning evidence of psychiatric fraud tied to Dr. Finch. Ethan watched it all unfold, managing logistics, financing, and communications. But quietly, he was preparing something else. He had been tracking Marcus Vance's real estate dealings. One property caught his attention, a small, charming home on the outskirts of town, up for discreet sale. The address was familiar. It had once belonged to Marcus and Clara before the divorce. It was the home where Lily had taken her first steps. Ethan purchased the house under a blind trust, then set about restoring it. Warm, sunlight-colored curtains, fresh paint in gentle hues, a nursery room quietly, lovingly refurbished. He said nothing to Clara. That evening, as the documents were submitted and the court set a hearing date for reopening the custody case, Ethan walked out to the guest house. He found Clara sitting under the emerging stars, a fragile peace about her. He handed her a key. "What's this?" she asked, puzzled. "A place of your own," he said, his voice soft. "A place to start again. Safe. If things get difficult. No one knows I bought it. Not even Marcus." Clara stared at the key, then at Ethan, her eyes wide and silent. Ethan's voice lowered, imbued with a tenderness she hadn't realized she'd craved. "Just a backup, just in case. You and Lily deserve a home that's truly yours." Her eyes filled with tears. She did not speak, but she stepped forward and hugged him, a long, wordless embrace that spoke volumes. And in that moment, something profound shifted between them. Not just trust, not just gratitude, but the tentative, fragile beginnings of something deeper, something unspoken, something neither had dared to hope for. The courtroom was colder than Clara remembered, not in temperature, but in the palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. This time, though, she was not alone. On her right sat Vivian Holloway, calm and razor-sharp in her tailored navy suit. On her left, Ethan Thorne, his hand resting lightly on the table, a quiet, unshakable signal of strength. The judge, an impartial replacement brought in from another county due to the clear conflict of interest, called the hearing to order. "We are here to re-examine the custody ruling in the case of Clara Meadowes versus Marcus Vance. New evidence has been presented that may significantly alter the original decision." Marcus's team came out swinging. Their lead attorney, a bulldog of a man, delivered a statement painting Clara as unstable, erratic, and manipulative. "Ms. Meadowes has a documented history of emotional volatility," he began. "We submit that she is using these proceedings as a way to punish Mr. Vance, who has provided a stable, loving home for their daughter." Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her gaze steady. She had heard these accusations before, lived with their crushing weight. What she hadn't expected was the slideshow. Photos of her looking disheveled during her forced hospitalization, medical notes doctored to suggest violent outbursts. They even played recordings taken without her consent of her crying alone in her old home, manipulated out of context. Ethan's jaw tightened. It was time. He stood as Vivian called him to the stand. After swearing in, he spoke, his voice calm, resonant. "My name is Ethan Thorne. I'm a business owner, a single father of a 7-year-old boy. I have no previous connection to either party, until 3 months ago, when I witnessed Mr. Vance physically assault Ms. Meadowes in a public park and forcibly take her child." A rustle went through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned slightly forward. Ethan continued. "I intervened. I brought her to the hospital. I saw the bruises. I heard her story. And what shocked me wasn't just the violence. It was the look in her eyes, the utter helplessness of someone who had screamed for help and never been heard." He then described the following weeks, the quiet resilience Clara showed, her gentle care for his son Leo, her unwavering honesty. She is not unstable. She is a mother stripped of her rights. I've seen her sing Lily's lullabies while looking at her photo. I've seen her make breakfast while wiping silent tears from her eyes. She's not dangerous. She's broken, yes, but she's healing. When he finished, the room was utterly still. Clara sat motionless, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The judge turned to Vivian. "Miss Holloway, do you have additional requests?" "Yes, Your Honor. We respectfully request an immediate forensic audit of the medical records submitted in the original custody hearing and a review of any financial transactions between Dr. Alistair Finch and Mr. Vance or his associates." Marcus's team tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Overruled." He leaned forward, his voice clear and deliberate. "Until such investigations are complete, I am granting Ms. Meadowes supervised visitation rights twice a week, effective immediately." Clara gasped, her hand flying to clutch Vivian's. Ethan looked at her, a faint, reassuring smile on his lips. Marcus Vance stood frozen, his eyes locked on Clara, not with anger this time, but with the dawning, chilling realization that his control was slipping. The judge concluded, "This court takes the integrity of family law very seriously. If there has been manipulation, it will be uncovered. This is not over. But justice begins now." As people filtered out, Ethan remained seated beside Clara. She turned to him, her voice a mere whisper. "You didn't have to speak like that." He shrugged gently. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, a long, searching gaze, before whispering, "Thank you for seeing me." Ethan didn't answer. He only nodded, because sometimes words were not enough. It was late afternoon when Ethan asked Clara if she wanted to go for a drive. "Where?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes still a little puffy from the emotional maelstrom of the court session earlier that week. "You'll see," he said, a quiet smile playing on his lips. They drove in comfortable silence, Leo asleep in the back seat, the late sunlight washing everything in a soft golden hue. Clara looked out the window, unsure of their destination, until the streets began to look achingly familiar. Her fingers tightened around the seatbelt. "Ethan," she whispered, "this neighborhood—" He glanced at her, then pulled into the driveway of a modest but charming brick house with white shutters and newly painted steps. The lawn was neatly trimmed, flowers bloomed vibrantly in the front beds, and a new, cheerful mailbox stood sentinel. It was her old house. Her breath caught. "Why are we here?" Ethan parked, turned off the engine, and turned to face her. "Because I want to show you something." He got out, came around, and opened her door. She followed him, hesitant, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. As they stepped onto the porch, she remembered the last time she had stood there, her hands shaking for entirely different reasons. Trapped, silenced, watched. But now, the front door opened with ease. Inside, it was unrecognizable. The dark, suffocating walls were repainted in warm, earthy tones. The heavy, oppressive drapes were gone, replaced by sheer curtains that allowed soft, diffused light to flood the rooms. The living room smelled of sandalwood and lemon. A small, upright piano sat in the corner. Books lined the shelves, and a plush, inviting rug covered the once cold, unforgiving floor. Clara couldn't speak. "I bought it a few weeks ago," Ethan said gently, standing a few feet behind her. "I didn't want to tell you until it was ready. I know this place has history for you, but I thought maybe we could give it a new one." She turned slowly, her eyes glistening. He motioned toward the hallway. "Come on, there's more." She followed him, her steps slow, almost reverent. He led her to the far bedroom, once the room Marcus had locked her in during her darkest nights. Now it was painted a pale, calming lavender. A small white bed sat against the wall, a fluffy stuffed rabbit propped up on the pillow. Fairy lights were strung delicately along the headboard. A tiny bookshelf overflowed with colorful picture books and new colored pencils. Clara stared, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's for Lily," Ethan said softly, "for when she comes home." Clara turned to him, and something inside her, held tight for so long, finally broke. Not in pain, but in a profound, overwhelming release. She took a trembling step forward and wrapped her arms around him, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh, you don't know what this means. This house, this place, it was a prison. And now," she pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her eyes shining, "now, it's hope." Ethan didn't speak. He only held her tighter. That evening they returned to Ethan's home. Clara made dinner, rosemary chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and steamed carrots, while Ethan set the table and Leo excitedly colored a picture of a superhero family, insisting that the mom had magic powers. After dinner they sat in the living room. Clara read to Leo while Ethan quietly cleaned up. Later they all curled up to watch a movie. Leo nestled contentedly between them. Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. Later that night, when Leo had been tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Ethan brought Clara a cup of chamomile tea. They sat on the porch, wrapped in light sweaters, the stars blinking gently in the vast, inky sky. "I don't know how to thank you," Clara said, her voice hushed. "For everything." Ethan looked at her, his eyes warm in the dim light. "You don't have to. I'm not doing it to be thanked." "Then why?" He hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Because I believe in you. And because no one, no woman, should have to rebuild her life alone." She stared at him, tears brimming again. But this time, they were not tears of pain. They were tears born from the beginnings of healing, from something that felt an awful lot like love. And from that night forward, Clara did not just exist beside Ethan. She started to walk beside him, not as someone broken, but as someone choosing to rebuild, one moment of quiet kindness at a time. The courtroom buzzed with a tense, anticipatory energy as Clara walked in, her attorney, Vivian Holloway, at her side. Her steps were steady, but her heart pounded a drumbeat of hope and trepidation. Ethan followed a pace behind them, calm and focused, a quiet force of unwavering support. The seats were filled with journalists, court officials, and a few curious onlookers who had followed the case closely ever since whispers of Councilman Marcus Vance's misconduct had begun to surface. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his legal team, his jaw clenched, his eyes studiously avoiding Clara's. Gone was the confident posture, the smug, dismissive demeanor. In its place was a man cornered, watching the empire he had ruthlessly built begin to crumble. The judge entered, and a hush fell as everyone stood. "Be seated," came the voice of authority that silenced the room. Vivian Holloway stood first. "Your Honor, we are submitting final pieces of evidence, documents, recordings, and sworn statements that unequivocally confirm Mr. Marcus Vance manipulated the legal and medical systems to gain sole custody of his daughter, Lily Vance, under false pretenses." She handed the bailiff a USB drive. The judge nodded for it to be played. The courtroom went still as the speakers crackled. Then came a familiar, albeit nervous voice. "Dr. Alistair Finch. I was approached by Mr. Vance. He said it was urgent, that his wife was unwell. He offered a substantial donation to the hospital if I helped document certain symptoms." A pause. "Symptoms she never actually showed during our sessions." Clara closed her eyes, her hands clenched on the table, knuckles white, as the damning words spilled out. The judge glanced down at the files arrayed before him. "You're saying this diagnosis was entirely fabricated?" Ethan stood now. "I visited Dr. Finch myself, Your Honor. I posed as a potential donor for the hospital. During our meeting, he admitted, without realizing he was being recorded, that he had never clinically diagnosed Ms. Meadowes, that what he wrote was at Marcus Vance's explicit request in exchange for significant financial favors." Gasps echoed around the courtroom. Next, Vivian introduced a sworn affidavit from Sophia Ramirez, the former housekeeper. "I saw Mr. Vance hit her. I heard her cry in that house more than I heard her speak. She wasn't unstable. She was trapped." The judge looked visibly disturbed. "Mr. Vance, do you have anything to say regarding these claims?" Marcus's lawyer began to object, but Marcus stood abruptly, his face flushed. "It's a lie, all of it. She's manipulating the court." "Enough." The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Vance." But Marcus's composure had irrevocably cracked. He kept muttering under his breath as his attorney tried to calm him. The mask was slipping, revealing the ugliness beneath. After a tense, charged silence, the judge leaned forward. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented and the credibility of the witnesses, this court finds that the previous custody ruling was made under fraudulent and unethical circumstances." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Lily Vance is to be immediately placed under the primary custody of her mother, Clara Meadowes. Mr. Marcus Vance is barred from contacting the child or the mother, directly or indirectly, until further review. Furthermore, a criminal investigation into the misuse of power, bribery, and falsification of documents will proceed immediately." The gavel struck again. It was done. Clara stared at the bench in stunned silence. Then, her hands flew to her mouth as tears, this time of pure, unadulterated relief, streamed down her face. Vivian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, but it was Ethan who stepped closer, kneeling beside her chair. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice shaking, looking at him through her tears. "We did." Outside the courthouse, a light, cleansing drizzle began to fall. The sky was gray, but Clara didn't feel its weight. Not anymore. As they reached the steps, a soft, hesitant voice called out, "Mommy?" Clara turned just as Lily, her beautiful Lily, sprinted through the rain, arms wide, her dark curls bouncing. Clara dropped her bag and fell to her knees, catching her daughter in a trembling, fierce embrace. "I missed you so much," Lily cried into her shoulder. "They said I couldn't see you." "I'm here now, baby," Clara whispered into her hair, her own tears mingling with the raindrops. "And I'm not going anywhere." Behind them, Ethan stood with Leo, who smiled as he watched Lily cling to her mom. Ethan's gaze met Clara's as she stood, her daughter finally, blessedly, in her arms. "I don't know how to thank you," Clara said softly, walking toward him, Lily's small hand held tight in hers. "No one ever stood up for me like you did." "You didn't need saving, Clara," Ethan said gently, his eyes full of a warmth that enveloped her. "You just needed someone who saw you." She looked at him for a long moment, a universe of unspoken emotions passing between them. "Well, now I do," she said, a soft smile gracing her lips. "I see you, Ethan." And under the quiet rain, with their children safe and close, something new, something precious began. Not in a courtroom, not on paper, but in the undeniable warmth of two hearts learning to trust and to love again. The days that followed were quieter, softer, filled with the kind of profound peace that Clara had almost forgotten was possible. She and Lily had moved into the guest wing of Ethan's sprawling home, which quickly began to feel less like a wing and more like the heart of a new blended family. Sunlight spilled through the windows each morning, and laughter, real, unguarded, joyous laughter, bounced off the walls. Lily and Leo became inseparable within days, giggling over cartoons, building magnificent pillow forts, and whispering childhood secrets under cozy blankets like siblings born to the same rhythm of trust and affection. Clara found herself watching Ethan more closely now, not with the suspicion or fear that had clouded her past, but with a quiet, burgeoning wonder. He was unfailingly gentle with Leo, never raising his voice, always kneeling to listen rather than towering to demand. In those moments, she saw not just the millionaire businessman, the powerful ally, but a man who carried his own share of grief, who had consciously, consistently chosen kindness in its wake. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Ethan suggested a picnic on a nearby forest trail, just the two of them. Clara hesitated, but Leo and Lily were ecstatic to spend the day with Ethan's warm, boisterous sister, and something inside Clara longed for the stillness of nature, the safety of open skies. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the trail winding through a tapestry of golden leaves and whispering pine trees. Eventually, they found a small, sun-dappled clearing near a slow-moving creek, where Ethan laid out a simple, perfect spread: sandwiches, crisp apples, and hot cider from thermoses. As they sat on a thick woolen blanket, Clara smiled, her eyes watching the light dance mesmerizingly across the surface of the water. "When I was little," she said softly, her voice barely disturbing the quiet, "I used to dream of being a kindergarten teacher. I loved the idea of tiny chairs, story time, all those construction paper crafts." Ethan turned to her, his gaze attentive, inviting. "What stopped you?" She looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Life, I suppose. I got married too young. Marcus, said it was a silly dream, that I should stay home. And eventually, I believed him." Ethan didn't rush to fill the silence. He simply let it sit between them, a shared, understood burden. Later that evening, when they returned home, filled with the quiet contentment of the day, Clara tucked Lily into bed and kissed her forehead. As she turned off the lamp, she heard Lily whisper, "Mommy, I like it here. Can we stay forever?" Clara's throat tightened. "We'll stay as long as we're wanted, baby." But she didn't know that Ethan had already begun preparing something, quietly, carefully, with the kind of heartfelt intention that said more than words ever could. He had reached out to an architect, to local officials, and within weeks had begun the process of converting one of his unused commercial properties into a community learning center. Not just for Clara, but for mothers like her, women who had been dismissed, pushed aside, silenced. He named it after Clara's late mother, Elena's place. The day of the grand opening, Ethan drove Clara to the location under the pretense of visiting a new business project. When they arrived, she blinked in confusion, then in sheer, unadulterated awe. The building was simple, but radiated warmth, with vibrant murals painted by local artists, child-sized bookshelves peeking through the windows, and a wild, beautiful garden bursting with native flowers out front. At the entrance stood a modest bronze plaque. Clara stepped closer to read it. "For the mothers who have been broken, and for the men and women strong enough to stand beside them, so their voices may rise again." She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ethan stepped beside her, quiet but steadfast. "You once said you thought you had nothing left to give. But you give every day, Clara. To Lily, to Leo, to me. I wanted this place to remind you. Your dream never died. It was just waiting to come home." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, bright and unrestrained. Without hesitation, she turned and threw her arms around Ethan, holding him tight. For a moment they stood there, the world holding its breath around them. Then she pulled back, her voice shaking. "No one's ever seen me this way before." Ethan smiled, a tender, genuine smile that reached his eyes and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "I see you, Clara, and I'm not going anywhere." Their kiss was soft, unhurried. No fanfare, no fireworks. Just warmth, just truth, just the undeniable, beautiful beginning of something that neither of them had dared to hope for, but that both had, in their own ways, been waiting for all along. 1 year had passed, and the world looked, felt, and sounded profoundly different for all four of them. The sprawling house near the woods, once Ethan's quiet, solitary retreat, had blossomed into a home in the truest, warmest sense of the word. In the mornings, the joyful cacophony of tiny feet echoed through the halls as Lily and Leo chased each other to the breakfast table. The air, once still, now smelled of cinnamon toast, fresh coffee, and sometimes a hint of burnt pancake. There were vibrant finger paintings proudly displayed on the state-of-the-art refrigerator, muddy shoes perpetually by the door, and soft off-key lullabies hummed in the evenings as two precious children drifted to sleep, safe and loved, under one roof. Ethan and Clara had co-founded an organization they called the Phoenix Initiative. It was more than a charity. It was a movement, a sanctuary, a space where women who had once been silenced by abuse and injustice found the courage to speak, to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of their past. Clara led with a fierce compassion, her own story a beacon of hope empowering others. Ethan, with his characteristic quiet efficacy, used his resources and extensive network to build shelters, fund dedicated legal teams, and lobby for real, systemic policy change. Their days were a whirlwind of courtroom visits for the women they helped, school pickups, late-night emails, and strategy meetings. But they were never too full for each other. In stolen, quiet moments, they shared tea on the porch, their hands brushing, whispered dreams and anxieties beneath the vast canopy of stars, and laughed until their sides ached over spilled juice, disastrous baking attempts, and the charmingly illogical negotiations of bedtime. One late afternoon, as a soft, melancholic rain began to fall, Ethan stood with Clara under the covered porch, watching the drops chase each other down the window panes. The children were napping, and the world outside was hushed, wrapped in the gentle gray embrace of the rain. "I used to dread rainy days," Clara said, hugging her sweater a little closer. "They reminded me of when everything felt so heavy, so impossible." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming velvet box. "Then maybe," he said, his voice soft but sure, "it's time to rewrite what rainy days mean." Her breath caught. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant gold band, unadorned by diamonds or flash, just a warm, meaningful circle. "I don't want a perfect life, Clara," he said, his gaze holding hers deep and unwavering. "I want this life. With you, with our kids, with the chaos and the calm. Will you marry me?" Clara didn't speak at first, just nodded, her eyes glistening with a quiet, overwhelming joy. Then she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Yes." 1,000 times, yes. That evening, they told the children over dinner. Leo gasped, then clapped his hands in delight. Lily smiled shyly and asked, her brow furrowed in concentration, "Does this mean we'll all have the same last name now?" Ethan chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Only if you want it to, sweetheart." The house filled with laughter, warm and genuine. Later that night, under the soft ambient glow of the dining room lamp, the four of them sat around the table. The meal was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, peas, but it tasted like a celebration. Leo inevitably spilled his juice. Lily giggled, and Clara leaned her head contentedly against Ethan's shoulder. On the wall behind them hung a framed photograph, taken just weeks earlier. It showed the four of them sitting on a picnic blanket in a sun-drenched meadow. Leo's arm was slung protectively around Lily, both of them grinning ear to ear. Clara was captured mid-laugh, her head thrown back, and Ethan had his arm around her, his eyes soft, with an undeniable love. No shared blood between them all, but everything else that mattered: hope, healing, choice, and an abundance of love. Beneath the photo, engraved on a small, delicate plaque, were the words, "We cannot change the past, but love and justice can rewrite the rest." And that, in every way that truly mattered, was exactly what they had done. Clara and Ethan's journey reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and compassion can rewrite destinies. What part of their story resonated most deeply with you? Was it Ethan's audacious stand for justice, or Clara's unbreakable spirit? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If stories like this, tales of resilience, love, and the fight for what's right, move you, please consider subscribing to Soul-Stirring Narratives. Hit that notification bell too, so you won't miss our next powerful story. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.